Hey there, internet friends. Welcome to another episode of That Nerdy Site Show, a weekly podcast from the team members from That Nerdy Site, where we get together to talk about our lives and all of the nerdy things we love about them. I'm your host, Trevor Starkey, and joining me this week, we have Logan Wilkinson back on the show. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing fantastic.
Excellent. So Logan and I are going to be talking all about In the Heights today, specifically the movie, but I will also be bringing in all of the fun, nerdy facts that I have on the musical version and the changes between the two iterations and all that stuff. But before we dive into that, a little bit of housekeeping for you. If you like what you hear, please remember to like, subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast with your friends everywhere you can, all that fun stuff. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can always support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, just like all of our wonderful Patreon producers did. And I didn't get to give them a shout out on last week's show because we didn't have a show last week. So thank you to our monthly Patreon producers, Pam Larson, Sherry Starkey, Teresa Wilkinson, and myself, Trevor Starkey. Sorry if you also didn't realize why we skipped a show last week. You missed it on social media or something. We took the week off with the 4th of July holiday here in the States. We just didn't really sit down and record anything last weekend. So that is why there was no show last week. But with all that out of the way, Logan, let's dive in to talking about In the Heights.
Yeah.
So what's like spoiler-free stuff first, and then I'll kind of
Mhm.
have in the notes when we dive into more spoilery kinds of conversations. But in addition to your thoughts on the film as a whole, did you have any kind of pre-existing relationship with the original musical, or were you just a fan of Hamilton and you were like, let's check out this new one from Lin-Manuel Miranda?
Yeah, I would say a little bit of both, right? I definitely was someone who loved Lin and the prior work he had done with Hamilton, obviously, and the soundtracks he'd done for like Moana and other stuff. But so I definitely came in with all of that, and certainly with like a significantly bigger history with Hamilton in particular, obviously, as someone who is a massive fan of that musical. But I also knew, I would say, a good amount about In the Heights. I've never seen it, but still like listened to a lot of the songs, obviously before I'd seen it, and then knowing people who are massive fans of the play, right? And including one of the people I watched it with when I watched it, who is that's her favorite play, right? She identifies very much as Nina's character in that like story arc. And so I had conversations around the play, I'd had kind of conversations about it, but this is certainly my first time ever seeing any sort of like physical version of it other than like brief clips on like YouTube from the original musical cast.
Cool. Um, yeah, I from my perspective, I being that I was like a nerdy musical guy, like already in theater and stuff. I even went back and found my original Amazon order where I bought the original soundtrack of Hamilton, or not Hamilton, In the Heights. And it was 2012 in the same order that I bought my Blu-ray of the Avengers, the original Avengers
Nice.
movie. Um, and I must have already been listening to like streaming versions of the
Mhm.
songs and stuff before that, before I would have bought it. So yeah, at least pre Hamilton, and even that is still like a few years after the show had come out and won the Tony
Mhm.
back in 2008 2009
Eight, I
era.
think, right? Yeah.
And so yeah, I'd long been a fan of it, and just the new approach to like a musical, like I, prior to that, and obviously it blew up significantly more with Hamilton, but like
Mhm.
the idea of like hip hop being that infused in a
Yeah.
musical's narrative was not a common thing. It's not something
Yeah.
you saw make it to Broadway. It's something you'd see occasionally in like off Broadway kinds of shows, or miscellaneous like local productions and stuff like that. But seeing it on that big of a grand stage was a really cool, new, interesting way of telling the story. And as we talked about, I think at length last year when we talked about Hamilton stuff, like because it's such a more condensed lyrical style, you can fit so much more storytelling
Mhm.
into the same amount of time as you would with like big 10 o'clock numbers that you would normally have in a Broadway show.
Yeah.
So I love that, and I love just the style of it. And then I was so glad, like I remember that musical blew up, and then Lin Manuel Miranda won like the MacArthur Genius Grant Award, and then Hamilton happened, and so like I remember following him kind of through all of that stuff, and
Mhm.
then and just being super excited about like all how all of that blew up. So so yeah, I'm a longtime fan of the musical, and was very excited when they announced this a couple years back when they were like finally putting it into production and stuff like that. I was like, yay, cool, very cool to see what that's going to look like, how it's going to translate onto the big screen and stuff like that. So so what were your kind of spoiler free thoughts overall on the show?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it. Right. I think it's a great film adaptation of the musical. I think, and we've had obviously a couple of different conversations off air about the play because how could we not?
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it does enough different from the like original Broadway version, as we're kind of getting to in a little bit, to I think differentiate it enough if you're like a longtime fan. I think if you're someone new like me who obviously never watched it but maybe heard the songs, you'll notice differences there still too. And then if you're completely new to it, I think it's just such a stylized and well put together film, right? If that's how you're coming into it completely new to it all. I think the cast is like so well put together.
Yeah.
Like every one of the four kind of main leads, I think, is like pitch perfect for what they're playing. And then Jimmy Smits is in the movie too. So I mean, come on, I mean, we got Jimmy Smits here. Um, but no, I mean, I think they just nailed so many different layers. But right, like we'll get into it a little bit. There are a few, I think, very small things that I maybe would have tweaked, but otherwise, I think it was yeah. I mean, I think it is a fantastic version of the story, and I think that it's like it's sort of weird to say given the context of like when it was made and when it was supposed to come out and then where it's coming out now, but it's like such a great, I think, important moment of like, all right, cool, like we are kind of beginning to get out of, knock on wood, the stages of the pandemic more and more and kind of back into some semblance of like what the world will look like post that. And like this is such a like bright, I think, celebratory, shining celebration of like what the world can be and I think just like life in general. And so yeah, I really loved it.
So yeah, for me, In the Heights was the first movie that I saw coming back to theaters, as I touched on a couple weeks ago
Mm.
in the show when we talked about it back then, and it was like a weirdly emotional experience all
Yeah.
around. In part because like it was my first time going back to the Alamo, and the Alamo Draft House in front of their like feature presentation, like the little bumper that you have before every movie, instead of just kind of the like After Effects graphic that it used to be. It was like a montage of like audience shots, like celebrating having audiences back in the theater.
Mm.
And so that was nice. There was like a nice little like welcome back message from Lynn and John Chu, and the writer whose name escapes me. um and so like there was just like from that I was already emotional and welling up with emotion on seeing the show, and then that just kind of like stayed throughout, and there was like this beautiful celebration of life in the show itself.
Mm.
And the
100%.
biggest like praises I could give it were, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the spoilery kinds of pieces, but were the ideas that I was, as somebody who knows the show very well, I was surprised and like curious how they were doing things based on like some of the framing of the film and some of the narrative changes that they make. At like they found a way to like, even though I know the show, I didn't know the movie. So that was a cool little thing.
Yeah.
And then also they cut two of my very favorite songs from the musical
Yeah.
in the second act. And even despite that, I still really, really loved it, and I walked out having a great time. I think a lot of the big like ensemble numbers are just like given a whole new layer when they can be big giant like showpieces in this, as opposed to the 20 people you have on stage
On a Broadway play,
on
yeah.
a Broadway show, having a street full of people, or a back alley full of like excited people dancing and singing and doing this stuff, or the from the trailers and stuff, the 96,000 sequence where it's like everybody at this giant community pool, and these like big spectacle numbers, I think, are where this really like shines and sets itself apart from the Broadway version. But then there are also a lot of like just smaller, more intimate moments that you get with the characters as well, that you don't get obviously, on a stage. So yeah, I overall I really liked it. I thought it was a great adaptation of things, even if I have some nitpicks that I could pull here and there that maybe we'll get into when we talk about the spoiler stuff. But yeah, beautiful stuff. It also
100%.
was very reminiscent. So John Chu, I think the only other thing I've really probably seen of his, or at least the only one that like comes to mind, was Crazy Rich Asians, which was one that for years it felt I was seeing like the trailers for that movie and just like had zero interest in seeing it and didn't care. It just looked like another like rom-com kind of thing. But then when friends went and saw it like opening weekend and talked about how wonderful it was being represented on screen and stuff like that, I was like, okay, well, it was either Movie Pass or an Alamo or whatever. Like I was like, I'll go see it. I'll go check it out. And I was blown away by how much I really enjoyed that. And while even that is largely still a very formulaic rom-com kind of thing, it was beautiful seeing that representation, and not, as a pair of white guys, it was great not seeing myself up on that screen and being able to see other stories being told, even if they're universally similar stories to the hundreds of rom-coms that I've seen over the years. It was just beautiful, and I love that. And so you get a similar kind of feel for this one of like, there's nobody on that screen that is me really, apart from maybe the tourists that are coming in and wandering into Washington Heights and lost. And I love that, and it's one of those things like, I've loved the musical for years, knowing that there would never be a part for me to play in that musical. And I have zero problem with that. It's wonderful. Or like in this version, because it's not really expanded upon in the musical, but like Pike Phillips coming in and having like the dry cleaners place as like the representation of the gentrification of the neighborhood. Like that's the one role that would be for me really at this point.
Yes.
Right. But that's not even in the original show kind of thing. So I love that. I love that, other performance and actors, actresses would be getting to do this role, and I have zero qualms about that, even if there are songs that I love to just belt out in my car that are not even songs that I would be cast for anyway, because they're like some of the female songs and stuff like that. So it's just a really fun as somebody that is a champion and will continue to be a champion for getting to see other stories, because I love getting to put
100%.
myself in other people's shoes, getting to see this story of this community in Washington Heights that is a very different community than my own, but still has flavors and elements of, my local community, let alone not even getting into like the Hispanic, surroundings that I find myself in or that you find yourself in. Just the family dinners and stuff that we see on screen are, even if it's a very different conversation that's happening, it's still, there's elements of that are universal and do feel easily relatable, even as a middle class white guy here in Scottsdale, Arizona, the furthest thing from Washington Heights sometimes. So yeah, I really loved it and had a great time with it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, one thing I want to give a shout out to that you kind of touched on is just, I think John Chu has such a touch for a stylish, colorful, I think, directing style in his films. And whether it's Crazy Rich Asians or here in The Heights, I love that. I love how vibrant and rich and colorful his films are, and that he taps into, I think, such a kind of constantly dynamic and moving and flowing style of filmmaking that I think is particularly well suited for a musical like In the Heights, but that was even, also very successful, obviously, with Crazy Rich Asians. The film just has such an energy to it, and we're mainly going to talk about Lin-Manuel Miranda, I feel like, in terms of like the story of In the Heights, obviously, but I think what John Chu does in terms of just directing the film is also really well done, and really well put together, and he just carries the story forward with such a kind of constant momentum while still allowing you kind of the moments to breathe. So I think he also directed it really well.
Yeah, I also want to shout out. I mentioned her earlier in the like she gave a like part
I
of the
was
welcome back
Googling,
video.
yeah.
Yeah, Chiara Allegria Hudes, because she co-wrote the original as well with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and she basically did the screenplay adaptation on that. And I think like she obviously had to kind of like condense it down from the musical version, and that's why you get a lot of
Hmm.
cuts and changes and stuff like that. But the way she did that, I think, is efficient and does a great job. It cuts, things that didn't really need to be in there, and you don't like, if you're a huge fan of the original, you maybe like miss those elements, but if you're coming into it completely fresh, you don't know there's a difference there really. Like
Yeah.
we'll talk about some of those in the spoiler stuff, but yeah.
Yeah.
So shout out to her as well, and I did not want to be remiss to not give her kind of the credit where it is due. So with that, yeah, let's dive into kind of the spoiler conversation. I don't know if it's a musical. It's it's not gonna be crazy and spoilery kind of stuff, but if you want to go in
Sure.
blind, all that stuff, like here's your final warning. Go watch it and then come back and
Go
chat
watch
with
it
us.
for sure. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
So yeah, kind of spoiler filled stuff now. What what were your thoughts on some of the big, moments of the film?
Yeah, right. So I think the big one that we've talked off air about, and that the two big ones that are different, obviously, is that like Sonny's character is pretty different from the original stage version. Obviously, first off, he's younger than I think they kind of ever really allude him to being, or it's he's younger because he's got to be played by like an adult in the actual Broadway version versus like a 14-year-old kid here.
Yeah.
And so there's that kind of, I think, age dynamic. And then obviously him being a dreamer is just not in the original
Yeah.
Broadway play because dreamer, that whole act, that law didn't exist at the time.
Yeah.
And so I like that change. I'll be kind of curious to see, I guess, your thoughts on that more fully fleshed out, but I like the change. I think it makes that character more interesting, and I think his dynamic with the rest of the cast, I think it helps, I think, set him apart and make him more of a standout character and kind of give his moments when they do occur, like in 96,000, that whole kind of monologue, even more punch to them, I think. So I like that change, obviously. And then the other big change, I think, is the winning lottery ticket and like the mystery behind that.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think that change works really well for me as well, right? Like not knowing until essentially the end of the movie who had the winning lottery ticket, right? And the fact that it's kind of this mystery and that they throw a pretty hard red herring by saying, we don't know who won. They just try to
Yeah.
kind of lie to you, right? Misdirect you pretty hard there instead of, learning at the end of 96,000 that like the abuela had the winning lottery ticket and it was for her, Usnavi, and Sunny, split three ways. And they're like, there's more stuff that's different, obviously, in terms of like the blackout in general. But those are kind of, I think, the two big tentpole changes that they did. And I like each of them. I think they each kind of strengthen the main narrative I think the movie is going for, in terms of the characters it's focusing on and prioritizing, and kind of giving the movie more of a like emotional heft to them in those two kind of moments.
Yeah, the obviously knowing that we were going to dive into the dreamer stuff is why I wanted to make sure we give Kiara kind of that credit, because that was one of the big things that she added in the this adaptation, because yeah, as you said, like DACA was not a thing in 2008 when this originally came to fruition, and obviously not only did we live through the Obama years since this musical came out, we also lived through the Trump years now.
Yeah.
And so that narrative obviously has significantly changed. Even the lines that Sonny has in 96,000 of like racism in this country has gone from latent to blatant. Like that is from the original, but
Yeah.
that was, has just blown up multiple times over.
It has a different meaning now.
Yeah, in the last 13 years. So like, and I remember from like the very first trailers seeing that they were like leaning into like Sunny had the line of like, they're trying to kick out all the dreamers and stuff, and being like, oh, that's very interesting to see that they're gonna like, how are they going to introduce that element into the show? Ultimately, it felt a little lacking for me in that it knowing the original, it does kind of just feel like knowing it was in there. I was watching for like the first hour and a half of the movie, like waiting for it to come up and even be a point or something. And it really doesn't come up until the scene between Usnavi and Sunny's dad. And then obviously like more like it's mentioned, like Sunny has the conversation with Nina really early on about like wanting to go do this protest and things. But like then it's forgotten about for an hour of the movie. And so I wish it had been more of like a through line of the whole piece as opposed to like that little tidbit up front and then a scene with Mark Antony, who I was like, I know this guy, why do I know this guy? And
right,
then finally realize it's Mark Antony in the closing credits or whatever, and I'm like, oh, that is not what I remember Mark Antony looking like. But then you get like obviously the rally scene, and so like all of those I wish they had been woven throughout the rest of the piece, if you're going to introduce that and have that conversation. And so yeah, it's not that it was bad or anything like that. It just didn't hit in the way that I think I wanted it to hit me. But also there's another area of like, if it, like I am clearly, not the target of that conversation either. So, it is probably speaking to that audience and that audience getting to see even themselves represented on screen, and the pains and the struggles in a character like Sunny, is, I'm sure, very impactful and very powerful. And then what was your
Boy Like Claudia?
Oh, the lottery. Yeah, the lottery kind of change. Yeah, in the original musical, 96,000 happens, and then Paciencie Fe happens right after that, and she like says like, what am I going to do with this winning ticket at the end? And then during the blackout, she shares it with Usnavi, and that's when like he finds out that she won, and then she survives into the second act of the show for at least a song, and like, so yeah, some of the adjustments and changes and restructuring of her arc there, like when, I mean, the movie kicks off with like Usnavi already has the money to go and like pursue his dream and go back to the Dominican Republic and do what he wants to do back there. So when like the lottery ticket, comes out and they say, yeah, it never got turned in. And to their credit, I guess they, depending on what the lawyer did with the lottery ticket, maybe he does just work pro bono. And so the lottery ticket never really did get turned in. So that could be how they like excuse the red herring that they give you. But for me, it was like, oh, okay. There was an element, or there was a moment in the movie where I'm like, oh, so she's dying without having given the ticket to him. Okay. I like that, because I like that, it now makes Usnavi fulfilling his dream, or wanting to go fulfill his dream before his dream, changes, or he realizes that his dream has changed. Like he was able to do that with his own hard work, with his own bootstraps. And it wasn't like this Deus Ex lottery ticket moment that comes in and gives him the money that he needs to do that. So I was like, oh, that's a really cool change to kind of what they're doing. And then when the lottery ticket gets revealed and it has like for Usnavi's name on it, I was like, oh, they did keep it the old way. And also they pulled my heartstrings, and you get that great moment of Anthony Ramos, like screaming to the heavens, no, you didn't, kind of thing. So like it got me to like rethink about the show twice as the movie was progressing. I thought that was really cool. It's and yeah, it definitely, I mean, Abuela Claudia's arc as a whole kind of gets like weirdly truncated, because like Paciencie Fe is like her big introduction song in the first act, that here obviously gets moved to like her finale song, and then she has a duet with Usnavi in the second act, that is it's called Hundreds of Stories, and it's where she's talking about, like, it's where she talks about Usnavi and how he got his name, which is like the story is still told, but it's now told from Usnavi's perspective. And it's also where they kind of talk about like what they're going to do with the money. They're going to use it to fulfill their dreams. They're going to, give a third of it to Sonny. And then that kicks right into Carnival del Barrio, where like the community is like rallying and getting excited. And Usnavi comes in, announces to the community, Abuela had the winning lottery ticket, and we just booked a ticket to DR. We're heading out. And so like some of that energy is still there, but now it's no longer like because of the lottery ticket. So I think those are the big kind of changes on that front. And like in both cases, Paciencia Fe is still a beautiful song, and it's like a celebration of Abuela Claudia's life. The only differences to that song are the ending bit where in the movie she's talking to her mother about like being ready to like die. In the show, it's her talking to her mother about what am I going to do with this winning ticket. I've had patience and faith, and we've been through all this, and yes, I'm going to go live for myself now. And then, it makes it that much more tragic that she passes away, 30 minutes later or something. So it's like, it's a weird thing. Whereas I was listening back to the original soundtrack today, and I think it works in both iterations just for different reasons. Like it's obviously in the original, it is tragic that, that she passes away because of the effects of the blackout and stuff. And like, but she does survive the night. And then like, as the heat continues to grow and stuff, she passes away, and we get basically Carnival del Barrio kind of ends, and then there's a somber announcement song called Atención that Kevin sings over the, basically like he is singing it to the dispatch for all of his limo drivers, and he tells them, please roll down your windows, turn up the radio, I have an announcement that Abuela Claudia passed away. And so even that song is a very beautiful like moment that is like a come down, and it's, she passed away in peace, but like alone. And at least in the movie, she passes away surrounded by like her family of choice and stuff. And so there's like a beautiful element to both iterations, just told in different ways, I think. So yeah, I think those are kind of my thoughts on those two big things that you noticed and identified. We've already kind of spoken to.
I'll tag on too, right? Because like, I think Abuela Claudia's whole, it's more truncated, and it's obviously she kind of gets a lot of her story compressed because she dies early in the play. There's not the kind of post blackout stuff kind of things, but I really loved her arc. And it is cool too because.
Yeah, I was just gonna interject. So another like just kind of general framing thing, the musical, the original version, like the blackout happens, and then I don't think they ever actually even come out of the blackout. Like the whole thing happens over the course of like 2 or 3 days in the original version, and obviously like this version is like super stretched out, and the power comes back on at Carnival del Barrio and stuff. And so yeah, there's like more time with having like the character pass, whereas like in the original version, like everybody is still reeling from the death and the passing of their matriarch in the community for all of the second act, which like, so there's like an air of like tragedy, but also celebration of her character in the original because time hasn't passed. It is, still a day or two. Like it's Carnival de Barrio happens, and Usnavi says like, we've booked a plane for tomorrow. And then Abuela Claudia passes away, and then everything else in the second act still happens up until the final song, which is the next morning, and he's still ready to get on the plane and stuff. So like they haven't really done funeral services for Abuela Claudia. It's just the community is like rallying together, and you get that beautiful Alabanza song in the stage version as well as in the music. So yeah, it's just like the timetable being much more like condensed, like heightens everything a little bit more, and because it hasn't had the time to breathe.
Yeah, and I like the time that it gives to breathe. Right, like I like the fact this takes place over like months right? And so you have like pretty much the entire summer from like Nina getting there to Nina leaving again. Is like the film version, and I think it does kind of allow things to settle a bit more, and you get kind of more space to breathe, and they can do like quick moments of just like them reflecting on everything that happens over the course of the film. And I think that the 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 second act of the film is there's a lot of shit that happens, especially in the film version where like yeah they're killing off a character, the blackout's happening, the blackout's ending, like everything's going on, like the dance number, like there's so much happening in that one act, like the the cab company getting sold also happens to that whole dinner, right? And so there's a lot that occurs, and so I like that in the film version the last act is actually pretty slowly paced out. Like there's it's not you're not really like hurtling towards the ending, right? You are given a lot of time, I think, to rest and look back on what's just occurred. And I really liked it because I think it makes more sense in terms of Usnavi's kind of slowly kind of coming to grips with maybe this is home, right? Like maybe I don't need to leave. And it feels to me at least much more natural than she died yesterday basically and everything is happening, and then the next one I'm like, oh, I think I've come to a conclusion that like this is it, right? Like I think you just given that character more time to process everything and kind of think through everything, right? And like it feels more natural, his and Vanessa's kind of slow button relationship growing over time, and like a few fleeting conversations and moments, instead of over 3 days, right? And so I like the space they give that. I think it benefits the film version as opposed to the play version. But again, each, like you said, I think are going for almost different emotional like beats and different emotional kind of like themes. They're trying to get to the same point, but in different ways. But for the film version, which I've obviously seen all the way through, I think it works really well, giving it that extra space and giving it that extra time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So other elements that I want to highlight. So
Mm-hmm.
the framing device of the movie as a whole, of
Oh shit, yeah.
Usnavi being on this beach telling these
Yeah, with all
kids
the
this
kids.
story, is and Lin-Manuel Miranda has been out there in kind of interviews talking about like with that framing device, like even if you're a fan of the movie or fan of the show, you're like wondering what's going on. Did they leave? And that's certainly where I was kind of like, I was like, what is going on here? Is this like a vacation that he's telling? And
Mm-hmm.
then there's a moment after Abuela Claudia passes away where the little girl who's been like super precocious and everything is like, no daddy, like keep going. And so you're like, okay, well that's like, you've probably assumed that
Mm-hmm.
that was his kid this whole time, but now it's confirmed. So that's like a piece of the puzzle, and it's like, okay, is he telling the story like while they're on vacation, or did he actually like pick up and leave after the events of the movie? I like, it's one of those, I'm like, I never really fully bought into that notion because I'm like, that completely undercuts like the end of the show of like,
Mm-hmm.
I've found my island, I've been on it this whole time. So I like the idea that it is like a visual representation of what the bodega becomes, and we start to see that kind of like fleshed out over time, and including like the weird little like Sonny being very excited about having drawn the little green crab that you like saw earlier and was like spotlighted earlier in the show in one of those like the cutaways to that stuff, and just being like, what the hell's with that green crab? That was weird. And so I like that, like that pays off fully. The the other kind of change that ties into that is like, obviously that mural and what Graffiti Pete and Sonny and Vanessa did there in the bodega at the end is what like is the final trigger that causes Usnavi to
Mm-hmm.
stay. Whereas in the original play, the bodega gets like basically looted and stuff during the blackout, and the grate, like they can't get the grate to come down and stuff, and so like it's the store is just open. And so like part of the blackout song in the original is Sonny and Graffiti Pete out there like trying to protect the store and then being overwhelmed as the fireworks start to fly and stuff. And so like and you get kind of like returns to it where like the champagne song between Usnavi and Vanessa is Vanessa showing up at the bodega, bringing champagne, and Usnavi is like cleaning up the destruction from the blackout and stuff like that. And then finally, the mural that Graffiti Pete worked on, with Sonny's kind of help, was the grate. They fixed the grate, and he has like done a mural of Abuela Claudia on the grate that will be like a celebration of her life whenever the stores kind of close and stuff, and it's there. And that's like, it comes down, and they still have the whole same like he's forming an artistic opinion kind of conversation. It's just a different piece of art that he's now reflecting on. And that's another place where I think like both of them work within the context of their story, especially 100%. Because you do get more time with Abuela Claudia in the musical version. So she is, you know, there is more of a relationship established between her and Usnavi that's going to hit him that much harder. And again, it's all super fresh in the musical. So yeah, I it's seeing the like Usnavi and the kids on the beach. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And like going back and rewatching it the number of times I have, like I enjoy it, you know, like each time, especially like they have that wonderful moment when like he's rattling off all of the names that they should know from Hispanic Heritage Month, and the girl is the only one that follows him along and keeps up, and like everybody else kind of like trails off, and they lose track of the names that he gives. And then obviously she adds on Sonia Sotomayor as like a last little, you know, extra one that Usnavi didn't even think of. So I love the way that the beach El Sueñito is utilized, especially even at the tail end, going into the final like finale song there, where like he sees all of the, you know, core cast members out there on the beach with him singing, and then the illusion breaks and we're back in the bodega. But yeah, so I ended up really enjoying that framing. I don't think this show needed it per se, but I do enjoy it, and it gives you the epilogue that the show doesn't or can't give you, because the show ends with like Usnavi saying, and yes, I'm stepping to Vanessa, I'm getting that second date, and obviously we now see that worked out quite well for them, and they have like this little precocious awesome girl, and so yeah, I enjoyed that. Did you obviously you are a huge Jimmy Smits fan, so like Kevin Rosario kind of getting the spotlight there in the original musical, like his wife is still alive and she has
they didn't kill her off.
It's both of them reacting to Nina coming back and having dropped out of school, and he still has largely the same arc that he has, but in the original musical, like Camilla is often kind of trying to be the voice of reason when these two strong-willed individuals of Kevin and Nina are butting heads and whatnot, and so one of the songs that's cut is Camilla saying like, enough, like when you have a problem you come home to Nina, and Kevin, like you can't like write off these decisions. Like the whole Nina Benny arc gets a little bit more to do in the original version as well, and Kevin and Benny are a little bit more like, Kevin kind of looks at Benny as like, he's not good enough for my daughter, and basically Camilla is like, no, he's great, don't do that, like you're acting like your father, and we both know what a pain in the ass he was, kind of thing. And so she's very much the voice of reason for both of those characters, but again, for like consolidating the story, cuts happen, and I get why they make the decision. It's like one of those, oh, that's a bummer. So was there like, did that like come across at all that there was like something missing from that family dynamic, that relationship, or did they just kind of do a good job giving it to you?
I mean, so I think both. I mean, like I knew the mom wasn't dead. I mean, like I was like, I started watching it and I was like, I thought she had a mom, and then Andrea, who's one of the people I watch it with, who again loves to play, was like, the mom I'm pretty sure was not dead. Like I feel like I would remember that. And so like midway through the movie, she was like, hang on, I just have to check. And she like had Googled and was like, yeah, the mom definitely was not dead. They killed the mom off. And I was like, okay, yeah, interesting. So like by at least midway through the movie, I knew for sure the mom would have been there. I actually think that, I mean, in the context of having to make it fit in this tight time frame for the movie, I think it works really well, because I think the kind of female matriarch figures in the movie they kind of focus on are Daniela and Abuela Claudia. And so I think like from the filmmaking perspective, it's clearly we don't want to have three female mother figures in the film. Like that is, and only like really only one father figure in the movie, which is Kevin. And so we wanted to kind of be a bit more even, especially with obviously we're going to kill off one of our moms. So by the end of the movie, it basically is like a 1-for-1 ratio of mom to dad here. And so I think from that perspective, it makes sense. I think it also works because I think getting rid of the voice of reason sort of works because it makes them have to kind of come to terms with themselves and kind of understand it, right? And understand where the person is coming from and understand their frustrations and fears and worries and why each one is valid. And then I think, you know, I mean, Jimmy Smits is great, and I think he gives so much to that character. And I think these kind of like versions are, it's always really hard, I'll say, when you have a father-daughter dynamic in any sort of storytelling medium where they don't actually know each other for 20 years, right? And like how good that chemistry can be. And I think at least in the film version, which is the one I can speak authoritatively to, I think it's really good. I think their chemistry works really well. Mm-hmm. You get the sense that they are father and daughter, and they have known each other and have been having these conversations and fights probably for 20 years, right? And so I think that carries so much forward in it, so that when you get to the final kind of sit-down conversation of this is it, this is the moment where, you know, you've surpassed me, right? Because you can see a future that I can't. That line carries so much weight. And like even I think if you did grow up in Washington Heights, that line hits so hard, right? Because I think certainly it's a wish that every parent kind of has for their kid, that you're going to surpass me, right? That you're going to envision something that I just can't see because of the world and the surroundings that I grew up in, right? And so for them to have that conversation, for them to have that final kind of moment, just one-on-one, right? Without that kind of person who's been kind of bringing them together the whole time, they had to get there just on their own, I really liked, actually. Yeah, it would have been great to have her just not murdered, maybe, but I think given the kind of time constraints, I think it still carries forward really well. I mean, I think you still get the final moment between them really working really well.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that you lose from Kevin's story is, and like we hear it, he kind of tells the story to Benny a little bit, as well as he tells it a little bit at the door at the dinner. But he has a beautiful song in the first act called "Inutil," basically, which is useless, is what that translates to. And it's when Nina kind of confesses that she's dropped out, and he feels so useless as a father, and he talks about like his history and how he's given up everything and was trying to give her this better life, and he can't, like, he's struggling with being unable to give her everything she needs to succeed, because even even selling the business, like, will that be enough, kind of thing. And ultimately, like, that's obviously what he ends up doing to help kind of like he sees her as like his own future and being able to live with opportunities that he didn't have growing up, kind of thing. I also like in that conversation with Benny, the notion of like he bought Rosario's, and when he bought it, it was called O'Hanrahan's, and the whole neighborhood was Irish, and it is like it's a reinforcement of like the cycle of gentrification and stuff like that happens in those neighborhoods, and continues to happen not only in Washington Heights, of course, but like just across the country. So I like that little like nod back to the version of In the Heights that would have happened in the 70s or whatever would have been a very Irish tale kind of thing. Talking about other, like, the other communities kind of coming in. It's almost the one of my favorite.
It's sort of what West Side Story is, just with like the Italian side, right? I mean, like,
Yeah.
it's that story.
What one of my favorite plays in recent years is a play, and I say recent years, but it's probably like 15 years old now at this point. But it's a play called Clybourne Park, and it is effectively the Raisin in the Sun house, um, but like now dealing with like the gentrification of that 40 years later. And there's like
Oh.
the two acts of the play are basically like act one is, I think, now it's been a while since I bought or since I watched it, but I believe it's like act one is the family that is like buying the house from the Raisin in the Sun family, like the white family that's coming in and buying it. And then act two is a black family that is, is affluent, and that neighborhood is now like a poor white neighborhood, but like, a wealthier like black family is coming in to buy it. And it's like, it's a weird role reversal on the themes and ideas introduced in Raisin in the Sun, now 40 years apart kind of thing. And there's like elements that tie the timelines together and stuff like that, and stuff like that. But yeah, it was a, like, I remember seeing it and just being like, this is a really cool reinterpretation of that story and dissection of the themes and ideas of that story, and how that neighborhood has changed over time and stuff like that. So like I love when stories dive into that and like identify and like examine that history, even if it is just in a a passing mention kind of thing, like in this. But yeah, we obviously see it with Pike Phillips coming in, and it is like, yep, it's like the the white hipsters, that we all kind of think about when people talk about Brooklyn or something like that, are coming into that neighborhood and pricing everybody out. It's why Daniela's leaving, all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I loved the sequence of that conversation with Benny, and it is such a like quick, you miss it and it's kind of over thing, but I think it speaks to both locally kind of the history of New York City, right, and what that city is and what it was, and then also kind of the larger story of like, again, what America is and its evolution, right? Like I think one of Lin-Manuel Miranda's greatest strengths is how he can take a local story and then carry so much about the larger kind of American experience in it, right? And that's obviously very present, I mean, self-evident in Hamilton, but it's very clearly presented throughout In the Heights as well. And I think that sequence is one of those moments, right, where you get to see this kind of example of, yeah, like we took this neighborhood from someone else, basically, right? Like, and like they took it from someone else, and they took it from someone else, and kind of ties into the larger kind of, I think, idea that he plants here, and then I think you see kind of fully blossom in Hamilton, which is the fact that like no one is from here. Like we're all like, it's all a bunch of immigrants and rebel rousers and sons from no good people coming in and starting something new in either New York City or in Washington Heights or in America at large, right? And the kind of change in makeup of that, I think, is clearly an idea that I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is really interested in, like exploring more and kind of tweaking and subverting at times. And that to me is one of those moments of being like, yeah, like Washington Heights used to be an Irish Catholic neighborhood, and then before that it was probably an Italian American neighborhood, and then before that it was probably a German American neighborhood, right? And like the change and evolution of what Washington Heights was is kind of, I think, portrayed in what New York City once was and what America once was and still is becoming. And see, I loved it. They'll just kind of throw away one-off line. I think it tells so much story in it.
Yeah. Another little note I want to celebrate and highlight is that in this version, Danielle and Carla are like in a nice established relationship. That's not ever really like, it's not that it's like not introduced or like the idea comes up in the musical. Like you could absolutely stage the musical and have that be their relationship, but in the iterations I've seen, it has largely been like like Carla just works at Daniela's salon. But so in the intro In the Heights song, like seeing them like in bed together and waking up and getting ready for the day, and then like just them in a relationship throughout the movie is like just a lovely little like, oh, that's a cool little new layer, new dimension to those characters that otherwise are just kind of like gossipy side characters. They have fun with No Me Diga. They're fun little pop-ins throughout a lot of the other songs, and then they obviously have like a big bit in Carnival del Barrio. But
Yeah.
like just giving them that extra little bit of life, I really enjoyed, and especially it's like more representation again in this instance being LGBTQ plus kind of community celebration. I really enjoyed that. I love that dynamic of like, yeah, like if it has no larger bearing on the story, like let them be that, let them celebrate that. So I really enjoyed that dynamic.
I also just love Carla in general, right?
Yeah,
I
Stephanie
mean,
Beatriz is wonderful.
yeah, this is
she's a
a
phenomenal
Brooklyn
performer in pretty much
Nine-Nine
everything she
loving
does.
podcast. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, she's so much fun, and she's so clearly, I think, relishing the opportunity to play someone who is just like the exact opposite of what she does in Brooklyn Nine-Nine for like 8 years now. And she just, I think every single time Carla pops up on screen, she just has such a pop to her and so much fun with it. Even if she doesn't even say a line, just like the way she'll like look or react to something. Yeah, she is fantastic. Yeah,
She's
I'll
so
have to
proud
give
of
a shout to
herself
that as
when
well.
she gets when she gets the record player to stop skipping. She's like,
Yeah,
I did it.
yeah,
Yeah, she's wonderful. And like as somebody who was introduced to her obviously through Brooklyn Nine-Nine, every
hmm,
time like I like when I see her doing interviews and stuff, and she's not that character. She is like
yeah,
a much more lighthearted, more like bubbly kind of character in general, or person in general. Like I love seeing those elements, and so I love
yeah,
especially when she does get to go completely, off kilter
yeah.
and do these kinds of like not ditzy, but like she is very clearly oblivious to a lot of things in this story, and she has so much fun with it. Yeah,
She
she's
has,
just a delight.
yeah. Her and Daniela have one of my favorite, I think, like back and forth exchanges in the entire movie, which is just, "What would Jesus do?" And then just, "Do I look like Jesus to you?" And then just just keep going. Like it's such a great just like back and forth,
And like
and the whole dynamic is so good.
I love, yeah, and that there, if you like, especially if you have like the subtitles on or something, you're watching it on HBO Max, like she does kind of like have a continuation of the conversation. She like she turns to Kuka or something like that, and she's like, I mean, kind of sometimes, like she definitely has some kind of like response to that. I don't remember what it is offhand, but
Yeah,
there's like clearly some ad lib bit going on there. But yeah, even in that, I want to like obviously celebrating Carla, but also Daniela is great.
oh,
One of the little Easter egg things I pulled in here: Daphne Rubin Vega, the original Mimi on Broadway.
hmm,
So like her getting to kind of like and one of the two kind of core um, uh, Rent cast members that did not come back for the film of Rent. And she basically openly was like, I should not be playing an 18-year-old some 15 years after the after the stage version when the movie finally came out. So we got Rosario Dawson instead. But yeah, I love getting to see her in this, and she just like is so wonderful and powerful, and yeah, is like clearly a great de facto matriarch once we get the
yeah,
passing of Abuela Claudia with the celebration of Carnival de Barrio. I also love in the No Me Diga number when they're in the salon. Rent famously had like in its original staging like three tables that would get set up, and then like they all come together in La Vie Boheme where the whole cast is sitting around the table and like doing what like kind of what they call like the table dance and stuff like that, where it's like they're just kind of like tapping on or drumming on or dancing on the table with like their hands and stuff. And I love that in No Me Diga, a lot of the people in the salon are doing that same kind of thing. Like they have like a
hmm,
table bit where they're just like they're doing these kinds of like hand movements and gestures and stuff all synchronized and choreographed. So I love just little like nods like that, especially knowing that Lin Manuel Miranda is such a theater nerd himself, and you listen to Hamilton, and it is rife with references to other shows, and
yes,
so getting to see like a reference to another big show with a very diverse cast of characters in Rent. It's a fun little nod there. But then I going back to what I mentioned in kind of the spoiler free stuff of like some of these numbers getting to have like just incredible showcases in the film version. Carnival del Barrio is like a song I almost
yeah,
always skip when I'm just like listening to the soundtrack. And watching it on screen, like every time I've watched it, I like eyes glued to the screen and just watch everything
yeah,
that's going on in there. So that's like an incredible kind of like the power of how that is staged and everything that is going on in the celebration of those communities and just those performers all getting together and doing that. I really enjoy that. And so it very much put that song in particular in a very new light for me.
No, I 100% agree to that. I mean, I think it is such a, I think, celebration of so many different cultures and communities, and the, I think, very real, authentic kind of joy I think that was had in staging and probably shooting that day just feels evident throughout every single like individual second of that scene. I think, right, like every single person just has such a big smile on their face and is just so, I think, extravagantly celebrating everything after what in the movie has been like a shit past couple of days. Basically they still don't have power days later, and kind of everyone's leaving, everyone's going to kind of bail out, and then they kind of all have one big last, what essentially is like a block party, and it is, I think, spectacularly done. Before we even get into like what it does in terms of like representation and what it does in terms of like getting each one of these communities and each one of these cultures kind of their moment to kind of celebrate and shine, right? And so I have, most people I know who have like seen that version or watched the version from like the stage version, who like were there in the stands with people were like waving flags with them, right? And like just like crying over like just like getting to see themselves on screen, either in a theater now or back in like a playhouse theater during like the Broadway days. And so yeah, I mean, both from a stage version and also in terms of just like what it does in terms of representation, I think it is easily one of the highlights of the entire movie. It is so well shot and so well acted and so powerful in terms of what it's conveying.
Yep. Um, I think the last big change I kind of want to touch on is so Vanessa's arc gets expanded. We get to get a little bit more of her backstory in this whole dream that she has wanting to be a fashion designer and stuff. Because in the original show, like she's trying to move downtown, but we don't really have like a deeper dive into her like inner life beyond that. Apart from her being like Usnavi's love interest kind of thing. So I appreciate that like she got a little bit more to flow. And then but on the flip side, like the Benny Nina relationship is changed in an interesting way in that it's set up that they dated before she went off to Stanford. And I don't like that's not really established or anything like that in the original. But then we just don't get as much time with them as we do in the original stage version. Like I said, one of my favorite songs is the opener to Act 2. It's a song called Sunrise. And it's the night after the blackout, Nina and Benny like basically like waking up together because they, went back to Nina's place and like, and got together kind of thing. And one of Benny's kind of arcs throughout the show is he is an outsider within that community of In the Heights as a black man in a very Latino kind of community. He doesn't speak Spanish, and that's one of the things that like he's trying to do better. And so Sunrise is all about like Nina kind of like teaching him some Spanish and stuff like that and quizzing him, and it turns into like a love duet between the two of them in these different languages. And so I love like I missed that element. And then obviously it pairs very nicely with When the Sun Goes Down at the end of the act, between the two of them, because they are I mean the sunrise sunset nature of their relationship there is just a fun, like beautiful little parallel. And then Nina also, while Nina gets to like do the dreamer stuff in this, my absolute favorite song from the original is Everything I Know, which is effectively Nina's eulogy for Abuela Claudia, because it's this beautiful song where she talks about like she would go study at Abuela Claudia's house, and even if Abuela Claudia didn't know the stuff that Nina was learning or like even had some like language issues and stuff like that, Abuela Claudia would say like, bueno, let's review, now tell me everything you know. And so it was like reinforcing Nina's like education in childhood, and it's also a celebration of just how in that community Abuela Claudia was, because it's Nina going through like yearbooks or like photo albums or the program from her high school graduation kind of thing. And so there's it's a very beautiful, touching song that I've long since loved. And then when my own grandmother passed last year, like it took on a new like resonance in that kind of context and stuff. And so that's the one I'm like I missed the most from the show, because it's effectively her going through and helping Usnavi kind of like clean and sort through her things. It happens right after Alabanza, and it is her response to Abuela Claudia's death, and it just does a great job of not only showing where Nina came from, but also Abuela Claudia's relationship to somebody other than Usnavi in the community. It kind of really helps cement, I think, that larger, the larger idea of her as the matriarch. So that's the other thing that I was just like really sad to see go. But again, I get it for the cuts they need to make, but I just wish I would have been quite happy to sit through another 5 minutes of the movie to have that scene included in there. I'll be curious if it ever if it was recorded and is in a deleted scene somewhere and just was cut for time or what. But yeah, that was one of the it broke my heart to see that kind of cut away. So yeah. Any other thoughts or any other elements that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up? I do have a few Easter eggs that we can run through as well, but if you have anything else you want to touch on or celebrate.
I mean, I'll just give a shout out to the opening number. We already did this off air, but I think Lin-Manuel Miranda is just great at creating opening numbers for plays, and I think In the Heights, like I think I told you yesterday, I probably rewatched it on like the version they put the 8-minute opening of the movie on YouTube probably like 20 times. Like conservatively, I just keep watching it again and again because it's such a great opening number that just establishes who all these characters are, what this world is, kind of what this story is going to be about. And yeah, so I think I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to that and how good I think it is at just conveying all the different emotions and quirks of each of the characters, and just how much fun it is. I also wanted to give a shout out to Breathe because it is like Nina's entire like arc in the entire play just put down into one song in Breathe. And so I think it's super beautiful. Before I watched the movie, it was my favorite song in the entire play. I think watching live versions of them all now in the movie, it might not be, but it is unquestionably right up there. And I think it is one that we've kind of touched on before, is so universal in its themes, and it can like hit you so hard. It was the first moment in the movie where I teared up was when Breathe came on. I was not ready for it. And so I think that it to me is one of the highlights of the movie. I think it's so beautifully done. I think it's just a beautiful song. And then the other big one that I want to give a shout out to is just Champagne at the ending, because we'd gotten to that point and I had forgotten how the play ends. And so it got there to like, oh, this is where they're gonna like reconcile and get together. And then like when it doesn't end that way, I was like, oh shit, like what, like are they gonna change like the ending? Like, is he not gonna with the Vanessa? Is he gonna go off and like, because it was done so well and it's such a like bubbly, exciting song with like Usnavi just trying to open the bottle of champagne to begin it with, and then it ending with like a much more emotional thing. That like I loved it as the ending, and I think it leads so well into then going back to the bodega, and they've painted the mural now, and she's done the dress, and them finally coming together. So I think champagne, and also just because of the like the Chekhov's gun of like the bottle of champagne throughout the entire play, basically finally kind of getting that moment of like, oh, here's a bottle of champagne, we're gonna actually share it now. Yeah, I loved that as like a final note for the play.
Yeah, I love Champagne, but it does. I think my biggest pet peeve of this iteration of the show is like you see it in Champagne, you see it I think in Breathe, in It Won't Be Long Now, in When You're Home. Like it is the last line of the song getting like an overly dramatic pause right before it. And like I'm pretty sure Champagne is another one of those where it's like, yeah, they have the kiss and she's like, I'm not mad, like I'm just too like it's I'm not mad, blah 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 blah, and then it is a very long pause. I'm just too late, and I think there's an over reliance on that like pregnant pause for the
Mm-hmm.
last line of the song. It'd be fine if it was like one or two songs, but like I notice it on so many songs in this, and maybe that's just because I know the album so well and it doesn't have the like those pregnant pauses. So like they sing the line and I'm waiting for the line to end. But Champagne is another one of my like absolute favorite songs from the original recording, and I think I think it translates really well here. Again, like in the show, it's him cleaning up the bodega. Here, it's him cleaning out the last of Abuela Claudia in his apartment. And yeah, even the like in the musical, because the blackout is still going on, Vanessa basically says, "I went downtown to get the champagne." That's why it's still all, why it's actually cold, because nothing nearby would have provided it. So, like, given that the power's restored and everything in this show, I appreciate this. She just went downstairs to get it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I love that sequence. And the crescendo to them finally having this like beautiful kiss embrace kind of thing.
Yeah.
In a real sense of like both of them are, it could very easily be spoilers for the show once, or I guess La La Land or something like that. It could very easily be these two characters as like ships passing in the night kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so this is going to be the one moment they have together. And I appreciate that it's not that, and that's not the story they're trying to tell. But like, you don't know that in that moment,
especially in the film version, I think, where it has been like months of them not syncing up. So this is like, we're each leaving tomorrow, basically, kind of thing. I'm going, downtown, you're going.
And that's like, she's already gone,
right? And so it's so
in this version because time has passed. In the original, like, they're both leaving soon. Like, it's still like she's still very appreciative that he helped kind of get the Carla to Daniela to like sign off on the application for her. But like, she's moving downtown, or like, you're leaving too, not as Usnavi says in this version, you left us too, you've already left, you're already gone. So there is that, like, that already there's like a split between them that could just continue splitting apart if he actually moves forward and goes down to DR. So yeah, celebration of that as well. Some little Easter eggs I wanted to highlight before we wrap up here. Of course, talking about Breathe, like we did just a moment ago, we have a beautiful cameo from Lin-Manuel Miranda's parents in there, telling Nina welcome home. Also in that one, I'll pull this one forward. Doreen Montalvo played Abuela Claudia in the original pre-off-Broadway run of the show, back in the Waterford, Connecticut tryout back in 2005, when she was replaced by Olga Merediz, who is the only original Broadway cast member to reprise their role in this musical as Abuela Claudia. Montalvo remained with the show in an ensemble and understudy capacity, and she notably sings the Mira Nina line during Breathe that kind of is the community supporting Nina. She did that in many different iterations. She kind of traveled with the show into many different versions of its run across, in the West End and on tours and stuff like that. And sadly, she passed away in October 2020. But her performance in this is still like a celebration and memorialization of that. She is, I believe she's also like the mural that gets kind of thrown up in the end credits sequence as like an in memory of Doreen. So this, and she's also going to be in the upcoming West Side Story film, are kind of her final films. But that was a tie to the original show, as well as, an unfortunate passing in real life. It's unfortunate, especially when you think about if the show had originally released last year when it was supposed to, she would have gotten to see herself up there on the big screen in the film before her passing. So that's, an extra layer of sadness. Patrick Page is the person playing Pike Phillips. He's a notable Broadway star, most recently for his turn as Hades in Hadestown, but he was also the Green Goblin in the ill-fated Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark musical.
That's the best one, yeah.
Yeah, Seth Stewart is the bartender at the club in during the the In the Heights Club scene. He was the original Broadway Graffiti Pete, so that's a little cameo from him. Um, the Stanford hold music is, of course, You'll Be Back from Hamilton. Tying into Hamilton there, the Mr. Softy and Piragua guy dynamic is, of course, Christopher Jackson and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who not only were they Washington and Hamilton in Hamilton, but they were also the original Benny and Usnavi in the original Broadway version of the show. So I laughed my ass off when Christopher Jackson popped up because I didn't know that was coming.
Yep.
I had not been spoiled for me. So that was a wonderful little nod there. Another little cameo is the original person who played Camilla, I believe, is in like the photos when they do flashbacks to like young Nina and stuff like that in the household. I believe that actress was in there. And then I just the other cut songs I think we've talked about most, if not all of these, but you have Inutil was cut. That was a Kevin solo. Sunrise, the duet from Nina and Benny. Hundreds of Stories, a duet from Abuela Claudia and Usnavi. Enough from Camilla. Tensión from Kevin. And Everything I Know from Nina. So yeah, I think that is going to do it. Any final thoughts on the show before we wrap up here, Logan?
I think In the Heights is great. I think it's a beautiful movie. I think it's incredibly stylized and colorful and vibrant and rich and a fantastic celebration of life that is much needed.
Very cool. I agree with all that, and I just want to give a shout out to the line that continues to get me to laugh my ass off after Benny's dispatch, which is another one of my favorite songs. The dispatch lady saying, "You thirsty as hell." I
it's a great
absolutely love that. I, like when that happened, it's just like, that is clearly not in the movie because that was not kind of like in the vernacular of the conversation in 2008. So love that moment and just the commentary on Benny's lovelorn nature. So yeah, that is going to do it for this episode. Thank you, Logan, for basically wanting to do this episode on In the Heights. And I will take any opportunity to talk about musicals and shows that I love. Dip back into my theater past and stuff. Do a mini That D Plus kind of episode around In the Heights with all these little Easter eggs and trivia bits and stuff like that. You can follow us. You can follow Logan at Lefty Logie. Anything you want to give a shout out to, give some love to, Logan?
You can go check out myself, Trevor, and John O'Peck sitting down on this week's episode. Yeah, this week's episode of That News You Care About. It'll go live on Wednesday. We talked about Jono's game that he's writing for and also helping do the sound design on, which is called Trigger Witch. I thought it was a really good conversation, and I always enjoy getting to sit down with Jono and talk with him. So go check that out.
Yep. Cool. You can follow me at Trevor J. Starkey. I will say, and I'll put it in this episode so it actually forces me to sit down and do it, but keep an eye out for the Let's Plays this week of me and Logan returning to Operation Tango. I need to sit down and actually just edit together episode 3. So I believe we'll have the last episode of me playing through Emily's Away 3 will go up on Tuesday, but I will then strive to get Operation Tango Part 3 up on Thursday of this week. And then also Logan still needs to send me his video footage from episode 4, which I never got. But I will get us back on that train, editing that whole thing together. So check out that as well. And then also check out the continuation of that Summer of Star Wars on That D Plus show. We wrapped up the prequels on last week's episode, and so we'll be diving into The Force Awakens and the sequel trilogy starting this week. And this is going to be
excited.
These are going to be the I think the interesting conversations, because I think
I agree.
we're a more split bunch on the sequel trilogy. Compared to, like, we all like the original trilogy, we all like see the flaws of the prequel trilogy pretty clearly, but I think we have some very different takes in the sequel trilogy. So keep it locked for those conversations as they come. You follow all of us over at That Nerdy Site, or go to thatnerdysite.com for the latest from us, or youtube.com/thatnerdysite. If you liked what you heard, once again, please rate, review, like, subscribe, maybe even consider supporting us over on Patreon, patreon.com/thatnerdysite, where every patron gets early access to a monthly bonus episode of this show. This month's early access episode, in tandem or in part because we were kind of taking some time off around the 4th of July, but also because we just couldn't really get something scheduled. I just sat down and did a solo episode ranking the MCU movies of the Infinity Saga.
Right.
For myself. So it's me basically doing a tier maker list of putting which ones, and it's not like I'm ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or whatever. It's I'm saying these are the top tier ones. These
S
are the
tier,
A tier,
yeah.
B tier, yeah. So it's one of those kinds of videos. So you can go check that out if you were one of our early access Patreon supporters, or that'll go live for everybody here at the end of July. Thank you again for listening. As always, stay nerdy and be good to each other.